Hello, and today we're going to go over a better way, the federal system. This is the beginning of the Constitution. This is the bare bones part of our start of the Constitution. It's going to take us 2 lessons to go through on the 7 articles of the Constitution. Now, what is the Constitution? We talked about that the last time. It's written rules and principles under which a government is run. So the U.S. Constitution are rules of how our government is supposed to function. It addresses the 5 weaknesses. First, they knew that the government needed to be stronger. They had to have power to be over the states. It had to be able to collect taxes. These were things that they knew they had to do and create its own money. Fine. But then how is it supposed to be structured? This one state, one vote was a really big problem. No executive or judicial branches was a very big problem. So they basically solved it. First, let's talk about the executive and judicial branches. James Madison, who's known as the father of the Constitution, Madison will become our 4th president, and he is a very smart individual from Virginia, and he comes up with a plan to make sure that nobody is too powerful. Remember, Americans are very, very sensitive to a very strong central government. That's what we fought against in the Revolution. It was too easily abused, even from a benevolent and usually on the side of good country, Great Britain. It still can hurt you. So how do you protect yourself against your own government? How's the government still be powerful enough to conduct the business of the people, but not too powerful that it can tread upon people's rights? So their solution was to separate the government into 3 co-equal branches. These are, instead of the states having to work together, now you have different parts of the government that have to work together. So they had the legislative branch. This is the branch that makes the laws. So if you remember, legislate, that's to make laws. These are L words, right? Legislative laws. So that's how you can remember what the legislature does. They make the laws. The executive then carries out the laws. They execute the laws. Okay, so think in sports, a coach tells them to play. This is what we've been doing in practice. I want you to run this play, and then it's up to the players to go out into the field and execute that play. And that's what the executive branch does. So if the legislature says, okay, we want to build a bridge over here, and they put into law, they say, okay, we're going to build this bridge, then it's up to the executive branch to go ahead and build that bridge. The legislature basically sets the order, and then the executive carries it out. And then we got the judicial branch. The judicial branch interprets the laws. Boy, it's not working for me, is it? Anyway, judicial branch, I'll get it. Maybe not. Anyway, the judicial branch is the branch that interprets the laws and hears cases involving, any problems between the states. Do we have an issue going on here that we didn't think about, or is this law conflicting with another law? The judicial branch will decide how that law is to be interpreted. Okay, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. The bigger issues, for instance, when we get to, so now we covered 4 out of the 5, and then finally we get to one state, one vote. How are we going to figure this out? The small states want to keep one state, one vote. It protects them from being overwhelmed by these bigger states, and so they don't want a system that is going to give more votes to these bigger states. So how do you solve that? Do you have a government where you get more votes based on population, or do you have a government that only gives 1 vote per state? Now, my son is autistic, and one of the things that he does when we say, okay, do you want Legos or do you want another toy? And his answer is 2. Okay, so he always wants both things. Well, I think of my son here on this with the compromise that they come up with. Should we have a system that does population, that bases the votes on population, or do we just give the states an equal amount of votes? And their answer was 2. We're going to do both. Okay, so the Great Compromise splits the legislative branch into 2 chambers. One, the Senate, has 2 votes per state. Okay, no matter how big or small, you get 2. There's equal representation in the Senate. The House of Representatives would then be based on population. Okay, the bigger state you have, the more votes you're going to get. So right now, California has 53 representatives and 2 senators. In Wyoming, they have one member in the representative because of a very, very small population, but they also have 2 senators. Okay, so every state, no matter what, has 2 senators, but then in the House of Representatives, so the Senate has 2 senators, and then the House of Representatives is based on how big your population is. Well, then we get into the issue of, well, then how do we count these? What about slaves? What do we do about slaves? Do they count? Are we going to count them in population because they can't leave a state and go to another? They're stuck wherever they are, and so they decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to count them as 3/5 of a person, and so for every 5 slaves, they would count as 3 towards their population. Interesting thing about this is that people cite this as being racist or anything. First of all, let's remember this is slaves that we're talking about, so it's not free African Americans. Free African Americans were considered a whole person. And then when we also say, this is what's interesting, do you want them counted as a whole person? Because if you do, then you're with the slave states, because the slave states wanted them counted as a whole person. It was the free states that said, no, you can't count slaves. The more you can count, the more representatives they get in the House of Representatives. So the slave states wanted the slaves counted as a whole person. The free states did not want them counted, so they compromised and they said, okay, 3/5, and then we'll go from there. Otherwise, the slave states would not join this new constitution, so they had to figure out a way around this, and so 3/5 was their solution. And then finally, on September 7th, 1787, they ratified the Constitution, and now it is the law of the land to this very day. All right, so biggest things here, the 3 branches, know them. Legislature writes laws. Executive carries it out, they execute the laws. Judicial, they interpret the laws, they judge the laws. The Great Compromise breaks up the legislature into the Senate and House of Representatives. Senate, 2 states, 2 votes per state. House of Representatives, the amount of votes depends on your population. And then the 3/5, slaves would be counted as 3/5 as a person for purposes of counting how many representatives are in the state. And then finally, in 1787, they ratify, and the Articles of Confederation are gone, and now we have the Constitution. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.